every costume party, there's like 14 guys come dressed like the Crow because they want to look hot and hook up. It's lame.
First written and illustrated by James O'Barr to parse out and process the loss of his fiancée due to a drunk driver, The Crow began its afterlife as a short-run comic that would go on to spawn multiple arcs, graphic novels, a card game, and even a day late and a $1 short crossover with The X-Files in 2014.
What?
The most persistent and revered iteration of this face paint and trench coat aficionado is undoubtedly Alex Proyas's 1994 adaptation. Emboldened by the grim crossover juggernaut of Tim Burton's Batman and saved from straight-to-video limbo by a late-in-the-day theatrical release, the My Chemical Cromance, known and loved by just about everyone else enamored with disintegration and unknown pleasures, kickstarted 30 years of unproduced screenplays, bizarre digressions.
So who would you like to have seen be the Crow?
I wanted to get somebody like Scott Glenn.
Scott Glenn?
Like an old, really ruddy, mean guy.
Yeah.
And a whole bunch of sequels that probably shouldn't exist. After being murdered alongside his fiancée, Eric Draven is resurrected by a mystical crow, so that he may stalk the streets and eliminate all those responsible.
Is that gasoline I smell? No! The norm for franchise starters has seemingly settled on using the first feature as a 3-act origin story, where the hero's journey is stretched out to a well-worn road of nebbish exposition, weak villains, and cloying teasers for coming attractions. 1994's The Crow suffers from absolutely none of these problems. The entire premise and narrative drive of the movie is set up and let off the leash in 10 minutes flat, we'll get to just how tremendous the big bad is, and it's an entirely self-contained story that exists in a world beyond our own. The hell that thing get in here?
That's why, despite releasing 6 years before X-Men and 14 before the first twinkle of the MCU, you can't really call The Crow an R-rated progenitor for the decades of cinema-sized superhero ubiquity that would follow. Outside of Blade, which listened to The Crow's lessons with gusto and ran with it all the way to my heart, the industry moneymen tend not to go in for these one-and-done satisfying translations anymore.
Victims. Aren't we all?
Taking place in a Detroit that answers the question, what if the Motor City got Robert Smith instead of RoboCop, there's a suffocating squalor to every street corner and seedy establishment that makes what little goodness is born of this dirt seem even more precious. Sergeant Albrecht is a miraculously good cop trying to keep himself and the streets clean as he wades through the dirt and despair of systemic corruption. Sarah is a young girl trying to hold tight to her faith in decency and true love, in a world that's weighed down her mother with substance use disorder and an abusive boyfriend. They're both daisies poking out through concrete as the pushers and plutocrats continue to stamp down.
Hi.
See now, Sarah, she's a genuine hot dogger. You hungry?
You buying?
I'm buying.
Now let's look at our hero and villain. Draven is a starving artist taking a stand against gentrification when he and his fiancée are brutalized and murdered in the name of profit and progress. That's right, The Crow is a morose fairy tale about those fighting for the rights of tenants who are killed off by crooked landlords. If you want to make a fictional work evergreen and endearingly timeless, dressing 80% of the cast in black and making these ne'er-do-wells a group of glorified estate agents will age like a fine Speyside whiskey.
Ow.
This central antagonistic dynamic wouldn't work nearly as well if it weren't for the performances carrying Eric Draven and Top Dollar into infamy as warring sides in the battle between righteous vengeance and snarling megalomania.
Quick impression for you. Oh, call, bang, I'm dead!
Brandon Lee eschews the prototypical macho man action template of the 80s and early 90s in favour of a leaner but no less threatening figure of untamable will. His unrequitable longing and feelings of loss propel him towards remorseless violence, as well as delicate kindness as he attempts to recalibrate a cosmic scale that can never truly be balanced. As the antithesis to those layers of heart and hurt is Michael Wincott's seductively raspy drawl, beckoning all his underlings to off this would-be angel of retribution.
For sake, die, will you? Give me that thing.
Now, I could speak at length about the loquacious, borderline vampiric charisma Top Dollar brings to each scene, or the sociopathic indifference he exudes with every abominable act, but in lieu of further fawning admiration for how great I think he is here, I'll just let you listen to him gargling thumbtacks for a few seconds.
Disorder. Chaos. Anarchy. Now that's fun!
This gravel-voiced aplomb is amplified by a cast of "oh, I know that guy" icons who elevate their supporting parts to memorable pillars of this goth-tastic classic. Ernie Hudson excels as a hard-up authority figure faced with nothing but worst-case scenarios.
I think you can rule out accidental death.
David Patrick Kelly parlays his The Warrior's weirdness and Twin Peaks smarm into yet another scene stealer you'd love to push down an elevator shaft.
Somebody stuck his blades in all his major organs in alphabetical order.
Throw in the character actor royalty of Tony Todd, Michael Massey, and Joe Polito, and now you've got a stew going.
Catch.
The whole thing isn't without flaws. A child performance that needed much more directorial guidance, a few groaning moments of insipid sentimentality, and an all-around lack of surprises or suspense given how close each narrative beat hews to genre conventions. But for me, all of that just amounts to a few stray hairs in a mammoth banquet rather than a plate-scraping failure. The Crow still holds up as a comic book adaptation and a generational reminder of the goth transition from The Cure to Nine Inch Nails in the year of the downward spiral. Of course, it's impossible to talk about this movie's legacy without touching on the matter of Brandon Lee's tragic on-set death during the production. I'm not going to relitigate the circumstances of the fatal accident that claimed Lee's life, but given the central conceit of this feature, it undoubtedly cast a bitterly ironic shadow over the proceedings that can't be ignored.
Don't you ever f***ing die?
All of this is given what may have otherwise been consigned to a straight-to-VHS cult sensation, a pop cultural weight and stature in film history it was never intended to bear, and what no future entries could ever hope to lift.
Say, are you some kind of ghost? Boo.
Each installment in this unlikely franchise that would follow would be subjected to unfair quizzing over a traumatic event they can only empathise with, whilst every actor to don these all-black accoutrements was impossibly compared to the spectre of a young man held in the warm glow of remembrance. What also didn't help matters is that every subsequent sequel is... well... very not good. After being murdered alongside his son, Ash Corvin is resurrected by a mystical crow so that he may stalk the streets and eliminate all those responsible. Now, you might have noticed the plot blurb I just read out is almost identical to the one I gave for The Crow, only with about 3 words swapped around. Well, that's because City of Angels is one of the most copy-paste sequels ever made. A less charitable person might even call it a transparently cynical and indefensibly redundant remake of something that had only been released 2 years prior.
I am shocked and appalled.
The head villain is a sex-perv drug kingpin prone to pseudo-intellectual diatribes. Again. His sidekick is a mystic oracle.
Again.
The setting is a hyper-stylized city of mildew and smoke.
Again.
It has the back-and-forth structure of the Crow offing cronies one by one and occasionally conversing with Sarah until he works his way up to the chief target, at which point he loses his powers, murks the man responsible for his suffering, then shuffles off this mortal coil with his soul finally at rest.
Again.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture.
What differences do exist are purely surface level rather than meaningful differentiators or significant subversions. A dead wife is now a not alive son. Rather than taking place over Devil's Night, this plays out on All Saints' Day. And I guess the Crow does unsanctioned buffoonery now.
Lady Luck's a bitch.
Cool. The fact this all comes across as a creatively dehydrated homunculus clamoring at the teat of a vastly superior motion picture is in large part due to the intervention of Harvey Weinstein, aka sexual predator and complete scumbag. David S. Goyer signed on to draft a script about a female crow. Harvey Pistane agreed, then immediately tossed to the treatment as soon as Goyer was legally required to supply a screenplay to his exact specifications.
Really, the mandate for this film was make it the same but different.
Then, director Tim Pope was locked out of the editing and post-production process, while Harvey Scissorhands intentionally restructured the entire project so it would mirror the first film almost exactly, gutting everything that strayed too far into new territory or diverged in any perceivable way from what he deemed a winning formula.
Kill him!
Do I think City of Angels could have worked without studio interference? Well, no. But I don't doubt it would have been a more interesting and coherent work, given the commendable decisions that are still visible in the released product. There's a lot to be said for the attempt at countercultural casting intended to lend this second go-around with the white lines and track marks of punk credibility. For a start, this one feature has 100% more Deftones appearances than the entire MCU continuity combined. Iggy Pop crops up and looks like an unholy union between Crocodile Dundee and a Karen desperately waiting to speak to the manager, and he's clearly having a ball with it. Ian Jury of Ian Jury and the Blockheads plays a kind-hearted tattoo artist, and he does a remarkably decent job with the limited screen time he's allotted. Then Thomas Jane appears in an early career turn as a queer-coded goon who gets offed in a peeping booth. A gag Goyer apparently liked so much he decided to reuse it in Blade 2 later down the line.
Oh, you didn't think I forgot about you, did you?
Then there's appreciable nerd minutiae like making Corvin a mechanic in a nod to the comics. These are decent components, but they barely amount to a single strut of this calamitously misconstructed monument to bad ideas, where they can't even seem to get the monochromatic makeup right.
One crow, sorrow, two crows, die!
Vincent Perez's go at the titular Birdman is at best a charisma-free pantomime of Brandon Lee's pugilistic pathos and mournful rage. At worst, it's a sloppy sandwich of chalk and cheese. A performance that conveys the loss of a child as a howling derp, before immediately snapping to the kind of tap-dancing cabaret silliness that doesn't so much undercut the severity of the subject matter, but rather blows off its kneecaps. You can be a bastion of lament or a dandy man giggling about close-up magic, but you can't be both at once. To look at the visuals for a moment, there are a few compositional brush strokes that hint at Pope's background in music videos, but for the most part, this is obnoxiously stylized in a way that drowns out the text they're attempting to aesthetically elucidate. What we're left with is a film devoid of action scenes or exciting encounters, shot and graded halfway between a mustard gas glaucoma and the very visceral sensation of being waterboarded with urine. I understand they had to try something to grab the eye because there's nothing of note to really pay attention to, and by the time we reach a finale that defies logic, cognition, or the vaguest speck of sense, you'll be hard-pressed to look at the screen through the paper bag you'll be hyperventilating into. The Crow City of Angels has gone down as a studio screwjob so rough it'd make Warner Brothers wince.
It was excrement. Did you say it was excellent?
A blunder that gave us some killer soundtrack cuts, propelled its writer onto bigger works in the same realm, and spun off into one of the worst PlayStation 1 games to ever stink up a retro bin. For a rehash this rubbish, that's probably the best this could hope for.
You think I'm afraid of you? You f***ing freak! You think I'm afraid? You think I'm afraid?
Speaking of a rehash, let's move from the cinema to my late 90s CRT TV. After being murdered alongside his fiancée, Eric Draven is resurrected by a mystical crow so that he may stalk the streets and eliminate all those responsible. No need to change a word of the synopsis this time around because, lo and behold, Stairway to Heaven is a 22-episode televisual readaptation of the exact same comic book source material that gave us The Crow. Given how City of Angels was, let's face it, a shakily traced do-over already, that makes this serialized walk through hell the fourth telling of the same story across 3 mediums in less than 9 years.
Well, just say, hi to Elvis and all those dead people for me and
I'll try and be brief here because the main flaw with this episodic take on the material is its superfluousness and length. At just shy of 16 hours, it does no better a job of expressing a very simple tale than what Alex Proyas managed to knock out of the park in 100 minutes. To justify its 5.5 months of scheduled programming on the Sci-Fi Channel, the now familiar beats are stretched out and fragmented across a procedural noir where Draven tries to help other wronged figures at the behest of his fiancée's ghost.
So what do you do now?
Try to even things out. My soul can't rest until I've set things right.
This approach is something of a double-edged sword. It makes for a shot in the arm to a franchise that really has one idea it recycles every time it's brought back. Mark Dacascos is handily the second best portrayal of this tortured figure, and the extra breathing room affords some tender moments where we come to know Draven and understand his eternal love for Shelley. We also get Hannah Foster, the on-screen debut of a female version of The Crow, which itself comes 1 year after the massively underrated Irish Shaw arc in the comics.
I do believe you are experiencing a heart attack.
For all its PG-13 cheese, I kinda like it. Hooray! However, this all soon becomes unsustainable and padded out to justify its own existence. I mean, just after the halfway point of its first and only season, they were already resorting to a clip show to meet the production order when they clearly didn't have enough gas in the tank to get there. By the time a member of the crew was killed in an on-set accident, horribly echoing the death of Brandon Lee in the film that beget this franchise, the writing was on the wall for the show. When it was cancelled, for as okay as it was at its best, the decision didn't feel punitive or as if the audience was being robbed of what could have been.
If he hollers, make him pay. $50 every day.
The Crow's Stairway to Heaven ran its course, and I'll say it here, did so with more purpose and invention than any of the full-length sequels.
Please. I don't want to die.
Try it. You might like it.
It's cheaper than a haircut from your auntie, because, well, it was a niche basic cable show in the 90s and they all looked like this, but it tries its darndest and does a whole lot with very, very little. For the curious and completionists, there's a DVD box set available. For those who want to stick to the feature-length efforts, let's see if the third time's the charm.
This cousin ain't kind of deja vu for you guys.
Rumors multiply as police refuse to confirm or deny reports of multiple stab wounds.
After being framed and sentenced to death for his girlfriend's murder, Alex Corvus is resurrected by a mystical crow so that he may stalk the streets and eliminate all those responsible.
You happy? I'm working on it.
Once again, it's a case of new verse same as the first in terms of the narrative, only this time the culprits are the long, crooked arm of the law. Unfortunately, the substitution of drug dealers with corrupt cops doesn't result in a dude dressed like Susie and the Juggalos tackling the systemically broken police force or judicial incompetence. Oh, hold the phone, that's exactly what you get. Hooray! It's a welcome change of tempo, even if the overall song is still the same overplayed funeral march. And there are crumbs of catharsis that immediately elevate this above the front-to-back failure at the previous stab of bringing Broody back. There are attempts at anti-death penalty sentiment, this diazepam Joker offs walking talking ACAB signs, and there's a scalding rebuke of what I'll call Brock Turner culture amongst persons in positions of privilege.
Ladies, drive carefully.
This is all thanks to the character's creator James O'Barr once again contributing an original story, which would then be fleshed out by Dexter and Homeland scribe Chip Johansson. And here comes the rub. These thematic teases are hints of a more thoughtful and gripping feature that just isn't meaningfully present in the final product.
Boo!
All these narrative elements are loudly announced and just as quickly sidelined in favour of shuffling, repetitive miserablism. It's like tasting the fleeting flavour of intellectual sustenance, only to have it immediately snuffed out by sawdust and saltpeter slathered across my tongue.
Spark. Gas. Bad combination.
Salvation seems stuck between stations, either too dumb to take seriously or too maudlin to reconcile its hoarse lamentations with the clown shoe daftness of a movie that features an elderly groupie for electric chair executions.
53 stab wounds? What kind of a record?
And wacky one-liners that immediately follow harrowing homicides.
Cheers.
When a mutilated zombie in a death row jumpsuit startles someone in a graveyard before exclaiming,
"It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you."
Or when the always wonderful Walton Goggins tries to sound menacing whilst hollering,
Turn it fucking baby down.
They're unintentionally hilarious belches in a feature that is utterly humourless. After a certain point, you either have to let the clash of accidental camp and self-serious frowning wash over you, or you'll snap your spine from the constant whiplash. I mean, what else can you do when the opening electrocution sequence is cut together with stock zapping sound effects straight out of Dexter's lab? The shield-carrying criminals here are tangled up in a scheme with this dickless guy.
Yes, it's true. This man has no dick.
And led by a body-modding Fred Ward. Yep, Fred Ward goes full fetish and it's just as uncomfortable as it sounds. Together, their masterful plan to defeat the Crow involves using Photoshop to gaslight him into believing he butchered his own bow and then just kinda forgot about it. And as asinine as that sounds, it very nearly works.
Fake picture's worth 1,000 words, huh?
Just don't believe everything you see.
Then there's the oil and water stylistic and budgetary disparity from one moment to the next. The opening credits take an intriguing page out of the David Fincher playbook, with a curiosity-piquing montage of 7 inspired imagery and the biopsy of a crow. These twitching blur headshakes are a loving and appropriately used nod to Jacob's Ladder. Everywhere else though, it looks like a funnier die copy of a Mad TV knockoff of an SNL sketch of a Crow movie.
It was a bilious piece of dirt that made me cry out in pain.
Did you say it was a brilliant piece of work and you'll fly me out to Spain?
Gone is the asbestos and grime production design, replaced with that'll do location work and prefab sets. Part of which can be attributed to its dump-to-video destiny following the critical and financial belly flop of City of Angels, but there's just a blasé shrug of artistic indifference that permeates this whole thing on a level beyond mere production resources and lighting rigs. City of Angels failed on the stylistic front, but at least it gave it a college try. Salvation reeks of a kind of it-is-what-it-is energy, from its flat appearances to its flatter performances.
Think about that.
Eric Mabius is woefully miscast to the point where his take on the material seems to switch from scene to scene, and yet no approach comes within a country mile of being memorable.
Where the f*** did you come from?
Big Bang? Primordial ooze?
Kirsten Dunst, appearing in this the same year she was cast in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, seems like she's wandered onto the set from a completely different film.
No kidding.
By the time her character has her mouth sewn shut, I felt relieved for Dunst, on account of her no longer having to try and sell this dialogue with a straight face.
Oh god, I wish I were dead.
So, is The Crow Salvation the worst of the bunch? Probably not. It certainly demonstrates an intent to step outside the shadow of its oldest sibling. A few of the kills are satisfying, and whilst its thematic depths are as shallow as a shot glass, at least there's something. What it is inessential and completely forgettable. After being murdered alongside his fiancée, Jimmy Cuervo is resurrected by a mystical crow, so that he may stalk the streets and eliminate all those responsible. A crow called Corvin, Corvus, and now Cuervo. Well, if you can say anything about the Crow franchise, it's that it's consistent in using the exact same inciting incident and general plot every single time.
Oh, déjà vu.
I mean, it certainly raises the question that, if the powers of the Crow are bestowed on anyone who dies an unjust death so they can put things right, as it is expressly exposited in each installment, why aren't there hundreds of thousands of Back From Beyond assassins? So far on film, 100% of the Crows have been dude minus one loved one times group of organised criminals equals Crow. The comics stretched out a touch. At this point the franchise has nothing to lose by moving the margins a shade. Just a thought.
I want to die. Do it! Do it, please.
Wicked Prayer does move the needle a little when it comes to its reference points. This is sun-baked schlock, unapologetically vibe-drunk on grindhouse and exploitation influences, and it's a trajectory I wholly endorse and only wish extended beyond some intermittent moments of R-rated weirdness.
Incoming! I'm an ass-kicking, night-riding, suicide machine!
We get David Boreanaz at his unhinged finest.
Homeboy's going down in the majors tonight!
As a satanic lunatic so committed to darkness that he only eats foods with the word devil in their name. I'm not making that up, that's actually a part of his personality.
Partake in the deviled ham, eat of the deviled eggs, and for dessert, feast on devil's food cake.
Then, a rogue Dennis Hopper appears as what I can only describe as a pimp for evil, who speaks exclusively in African American vernacular English.
Wicked ass props to you, Mr. OG, and thanks for representing all the homeboys.
Which is certainly a choice.
Don't undercut me, shorty.
Alas, the now set-in-stone format of all things Crow must be followed from beginning to end, and it's a millstone that stops this ascending from curiously trashy to splendiferous trash. As with Salvation, Wicked Prayer has socio-political points that are present but too dull to cut through. The first act promises talk of displaced Indigenous Americans, the impact of eco-terrorism, and the perpetuation of interracial violence by systems of power. But that all turns to marble-mouthed mumbling before being silenced altogether by a format that refuses to evolve or die. It takes 45 minutes of backstory and build-up before the inevitable crowing of our protagonist, who once again turns out to be the least interesting character in his own movie.
Oh yeah, wedding speeches. Better at eulogies.
That's what I'm talking about.
Boreanaz is so charismatic and commanding as the villain, he sucks the air out of the room and makes every scene not directly involving him feel like a purgatorial wait for the fun to come back.
Hurry up! Make me the fucking Antichrist!
The rest of what's left is a mopey montage of emo grumbling and lackadaisical plotting, some ill-advised cultural appropriation, a perplexing amount of red-hewn flashbacks to things that happened mere moments ago, and not a lot else. Edward Furlong and Tara Reid say all their lines, but rarely enunciate or act them with the gonzo commitment they so desperately need to offset the placeholder writing.
I want to die, but we can't. Not tonight.
They're present, but don't really have a presence, which is a pretty huge problem when you're two of the three leads trying to steer this blimp.
I bet you that virgin bride tastes just like cherry pie.
The Crow Wicked Prayer isn't good, but when the bar is comfortably rested somewhere below a botched frontal lobotomy since about 1994, that's par for the course.
It was an awful piece of junk that made me want to puke all night.
Did you say it was an awesome piece of spunk that you want to shoot tonight?
You're a hiccup, man. Fart in my gas pump.
For 35 years, The Crow hasn't so much been the gift that keeps on giving, as it's been an incoherent goth friend who crashes on the couch for a weekend whenever they're passing through town. What was once purged onto the page from a place of grief and would be translated into a cult favourite marred by the bitter pang of tragedy, has stumbled with every step when trying to find its footing as a franchise.
If you can't see anything nice, don't say anything at all.
We've had the studio-mangled cynical attempt to strike while the iron was hot. A decent draft that was divvied up and diluted. Then the tonal mess born of big ideas and a small brain.
So now we're talking about a ghost with a f***ing pet bird, is that right?
Capped off by a fallen angel and hopping mad Hopper putting on a big show for an empty house.
So God gave trash, like you, wings!
Now, let's close out this retrospective by talking about the reboot. After being murdered alongside his fiancée, Eric Draven is resurrected by a mystical crow, so that he may stalk the streets and eliminate all those responsible.
Again?
Not again. Not again, man.
Is that possible?
What a loser.
A handsome goth zombie for Jennifer C, Claire MD, Becky O, Kay Krause, Jennifer Fetish, Reed Stoven, and Nicholas Lair Revere, and a collection of surprisingly awesome soundtracks for these amazing folks who support us over on Patreon. So what's your history with The Crow? How would you rate and rank them? And what are your feelings on the 2024 reboot? As always, the best way to help out the channel is to like these videos, share them with a friend, and leave a comment. And if you're in a position to do so, please consider checking out our Patreon at the link in the description below, where you can sign up to our film club, our private Discord, and get your name in the end credits of each episode. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, this is In Frame Out.